Hello and welcome everybody. I'm MD Thornton83 and welcome to another retro TV review by yours truly. You know, it's hard to find good entertainment nowadays. And sometimes when you go looking for something new to get into, you'll find a diamond in the rough. Other times you'll find a turd covered in toxic waste. In the case of today's subject, it's definitely the latter. So without further delay, let's get into today's subject. White Fang. Now, usually when it comes to White Fang, most people think of the famous novel that was written and published by Jack London in 1906, or the live-action film starring the wolf dog Jed, who was also in John Carpenter's The Thing, surprise surprise. And of course there has even been a few cartoons based on the novel. The one I remember most fondly is the 1992 TV series titled The Legend of White Fang, which has nothing to do with the novel, but was basically its own retelling of the story. But the cartoon I'll be reviewing today is an animated feature film simply titled White Fang. It was created by Goodtimes Entertainment, directed by Michael Sporn, and released in 1997. Now, it's likely that not many of you have heard of this cartoon before, given its rarity and obscurity. Well, there is a reason for this. The film was not very well received, and it remains in obscurity to this day. And not only that, but this movie was strictly a direct-to-video release, so naturally it was never released theatrically. The film is true to the novel to a degree, but it's very poorly executed, and I mean poorly. It's very amateurish in every aspect imaginable, right down to the script and editing. Now, the first thing I notice about this movie is the cover art. Apparently, Goodtimes Entertainment managed to rip off images from Balto. In fact, this entire movie is a Balto ripoff from what I've seen, down to some of the character designs which were also plagiarized. I mean, seriously, they're not even trying. And that's not all that was ripped off either. Goodtimes Entertainment was infamous for ripping off movies mostly from Disney, but they also stole from other companies as well. And seeing the record of how many films they've ripped off, it's a wonder they haven't had the pantsuit off of them. And mind you, Balto was released 2 years prior to this, so naturally they did a rip-off of Balto in the form of White Fang, which has a similar protagonist and setting. But believe me when I say that this movie has not aged well. Because compared to the masterpiece that is Balto, this miserable excuse for a White Fang cartoon fades drastically in comparison. But now's my chance to share my own thoughts and feelings that I have of this cartoon. Okay, my first problem with this cartoon is that the animation is garbage. Even for its time, it looks like shit. The characters are very poorly drawn, and the backgrounds are especially uninspired. And on top of that, the moving quality is abysmal. I have a high sense of appreciation for 2D animation, especially if it's well done and is of high quality. But this film does not have quality animation. It looks ugly, amateurish, rushed, and generic. I mean, hell, it's so bland and uninspired that it makes even the animation from Titanic: The Legend Goes On look like a masterpiece. And we all know how bad that movie was. The moving quality is not very smooth and it just looks choppy. And not only that, but the characters are very disproportionate and they tend to change shape and size in some scenes. In most movies, you at least get the idea that the animators used a model sheet to reference the characters from. But the anatomy and size of the characters changes regularly in between shots, which makes the animation very sloppy and inconsistent. And not only that, but in some scenes, they also tend to move too fast or too slow, which annoyed me. I mean, hell, even the perspective and angles are off in each shot. So as you can tell, the animation in this movie sucks. It sucks so bad that it fades drastically in comparison to your typical Disney or Don Bluth film. Take a film like Balto. Again, that movie was released in 1995, only 2 years before this, and that holds up way better visually. My guess is that Goodtimes Entertainment just couldn't be bothered to put much effort into this, or maybe this movie was made on a low budget. I'm guessing it's a bit of both. And then there's the voice acting, which sadly is not much better. The voices are alright, I guess, but the actors don't sound very convincing, and they don't sound like they're trying to put a whole lot of effort into their work. The voice acting in this film is so bland that it makes the voice acting from Mega Man 8 and Mega Man X4 sound good.
Hey, Zach! Why must I fight you? We are not enemies!
Shut up!
For as horrible as the voice acting was in those games, at least the actors tried somewhat to sound convincing, even if the voices didn't fit the characters. But in this movie, the actors didn't sound like they were even trying to sound convincing. Some of the voices are either really bland or really annoying to listen to, like the Rabbit, Quiche, Spike, Lip Lip, and his minions. Though the voice they chose for Child White Fang was surprisingly fitting, though it just sounded like he was merely reading his lines off the script than actually saying them as they were meant to be said.
I know you did, Mama, but there was this squirrel, see? And then there was this rabbit who showed me this bear.
His adult voice was especially fitting, even though he seemed to have gained it a bit prematurely when he was still a puppy.
Yeah? No.
Oh, and before I begin, this movie has musical numbers.
Squirrel, see?
It's your destiny to be a wolf proud.
Yeah. I don't really have a problem with musical numbers as long as they're done well, but believe me when I say that the musical numbers in this movie are so grating and are so annoying to listen to that they make me just want to mute the volume on my TV set so that I don't have to listen to them. But it's really not necessary to go over them, trust me. Oh, and contrary to the novel, this cartoon is an extremely dumbed down version of the story that cuts out many of the important events that happen in the book, some of which are dark and gritty. And yes, they took as many shortcuts as they possibly could just to make this as kid-friendly as possible. But you will soon see how they fail miserably at it. Chapter 1. So our story begins with a female narrator who introduces us to the Yukon wilderness, and needless to say, this woman's narration sounds pretty uninspired and amateurish at worst.
The grand Yukon wilderness. Majestic, serene, unspoiled. A glorious place to live.
Not that that's surprising because, well, none of the voice actors in this movie really take their roles seriously. Anyway, we are introduced to all the animals that live there, which again are badly illustrated and look really cheap even by today's standards. To quote what my friend Saffron Panther said in his review of this movie, they somewhat resemble the designs from Sonic SatAM if you oversimplified them and really limited the movements they could make. And yes, it's as cheap as it can get. We cut to an old aging wolf named One Eye, who of course is White Fang's father. He bears a scar on one of his eyes, and he's out hunting for food. He pursues a rabbit with no success, and not only that, but he keeps running into trees, a sign that he's getting on in his age. After introducing One Eye to the audience, the film then cuts to Quiche and her son White Fang. Oh, and one other thing. In this movie, Quiche's name is pronounced as quiche. Quiche? As in spinach quiche? Moving on. White Fang is named so for his pearly white teeth. Now, I have to admit that despite the crappy low-budget animation, the newborn White Fang is actually quite cute and adorable. In fact, that's at least one thing that I'll give this film credit for. Making White Fang look cute during his puppyhood. The narrator assures us that there's something legendary about the little pup, but then she admits that she's probably just making it up.
White Fang began life innocently enough as a young pup. But early on, you could tell that there was something special about him. Something that legends are made of. Well, maybe I stretched the truth a bit.
I mean, seriously, make up your mind, woman. Do you believe in White Fang or do you not? You are a terrible narrator if you can't decide on whether or not there's something special about the main protagonist. So anyway, White Fang is being cared for by his mother, and he complains that he's hungry.
When is Dad coming home? I'm hungry.
Soon, I hope, but this harsh winter makes hunting difficult.
Now, here's something that I noticed about Quiche. Her voice actress doesn't sound like she's trying to put any effort into her acting other than just reading her lines off the script in a motherly tone of voice.
White Fang, you have so much to learn. Why, that's fierce enough to scare a bear.
As for Quiche herself, she's extremely underdeveloped as a character in this movie. She never seems to get the big picture, and as such, she never questions anything that happens in the movie. Another odd thing about Quiche is that she always has a smile on her face, even when something tragic has happened. I'm not joking. Quiche never changes her facial expression no matter the circumstances, and believe me, her credibility as a mother only becomes more questionable as time goes on. And so White Fang's father One Eye returns home empty-handed, or in this case, empty-pawed, since canines don't have opposable thumbs. White Fang asks his father about the scar on his face, and we are treated to the first musical number sung by One Eye.
It's your destiny to be a wolf proud and strong. You will be free as the wind blows through the valley.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just gonna skip that and move on to how the story unfolds, because again, the musical numbers in this movie are so horrible that they make my ears bleed. And they don't even come close to being as good or as memorable as any of the musical numbers from your standard Disney film. And so after that bland musical number is over, One Eye immediately goes out hunting again despite his previous failure to catch a rabbit. Shouldn't he be exhausted? I mean, he's had quite a day. Especially, since he's aged. In the next scene, he is seen chasing a moose through a wintry wilderness. He is successful to corner it to a dead end, which is just off a cliff on the mountainside. But then out of nowhere, an avalanche occurs. Okay, I'm not so sure how this happens since, most of the times avalanches are triggered by loud noises and such. The moose manages to get away, but One Eye is not so lucky. Okay, I have to give this movie credit for this one death scene that occurs in it. I mean, at least they made One Eye's death seem sad, tragic, and heartbreaking. But of course, it happens off screen. And we immediately cut back to Quiche, who hears One Eye's last howl from a distance. She leaves the cave to investigate.
Listen, my little one.
But not before telling her son to stay put in the cave. It takes a bit of effort and persuasion from her to make her authority as a mother be known to White Fang, as he is eager to go search for his missing father, who unbeknownst to the poor pup is dead. But naturally, since Quiche is the mother, she wins the argument, and the pup stays behind.
No fair. Everybody's out hunting but me.
The next morning, White Fang finds that his mother had been gone the whole night. So he leaves the cave and tries to catch a squirrel, only to end up falling down the hillside. And at the same time, he is mocked, teased, and made fun of by an obnoxious smartass rabbit. This rabbit is one of the most unlikable characters in this entire film. So much that I just want to kill him with a shotgun. Okay, I guess that's a bit dark coming from me, but you get what I mean. And since White Fang knew so little about the world around him, the rabbit decides to take advantage of White Fang's naivety and tricks him into thinking that a mouse was a bear. Because White Fang was only a puppy then. He didn't know what actual bears looked like at the time. So the condescending jerk of a rabbit makes a complete ass out of the poor pup just for his own sadistic pleasure. The mouse manages to escape its pursuer through a log, and White Fang ends up hitting his head against it. Fortunately, Quiche finds her son before the rabbit could make fun of him any further, and before White Fang could hurt himself any further.
What do you think you're doing out here?
Mama!
I thought I told you to stay put in our cave.
I know you did, Mama, but there
The two
was
journey back to their dwelling, and the rabbit makes one last smart-ass remark before he fades to the next scene.
this bear that I was going to catch.
Kids.
Thankfully, this is the only time we'll ever see this jerk of a rodent. Back at the cave, Quiche blandly tells White Fang that his father is dead, and that he is no longer among the living. And again, her bland voice acting along with the constant smile she has on her face really makes her performance seem unconvincing. I mean, seriously, why is she always smiling? Is she stoned or does she just not give a shit? Of course, she doesn't outright tell him that he's dead, but rather she just says,
Listen to me carefully, White Fang. There's something important I must tell you. Your father won't be coming back.
Not coming back? Mama, what do you mean?
She also adds,
Your father was in an accident. An avalanche.
Quite surprisingly, White Fang seems more emotionally struck by his father's death than Quiche is. Because again, she shows little to no emotion at all, almost like she's a freaking mannequin. Seriously, couldn't they put more effort into Quiche's character, let alone how she reacts to certain things? Anyway, with One Eye dead, the two canines see that they have no choice but to leave the cave and go somewhere else where there's food and shelter.